Midtown studios of Bloomberg Television in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Peru President Alberto Fujimori ordered a surprise raid on the Japanese embassy in Lima yesterday. 71 hostages taken by the group known as Tupac Amaru, or MRTA, had suffered 4 months while negotiators tried to win their release. The siege cost 17 lives, including one of the hostages and all of the kidnappers. Joining me now, Ambassador Ricardo Luna. He is a career diplomat. He is the Ambassador of Peru to the United States, a former ambassador to the United Nations, and he has a long history here in the United States. Princeton University from 58 to 62, Columbia University from 62 to 64, and Harvard University as a fellow from 1980 to 1981. I'm pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm glad to come.
Your president has been here a number of times, as
That's
you
right.
know. Tell me about yesterday, everything you know about this. And I mean, everything was on the line. Lives were on the line, but a government was probably on the line.
Well, I think, like in any situation of this sort, which is unpredictable and difficult to foresee as to the timing of the outcome, you had two scenarios. You had a conversation scenario, an earnest need to get a solution by peaceful means, and at the same time you had a contingency plan. I get the feeling that after the third month, where there was really very little progress and very little possibility of breaking through along the lines of what was really acceptable to the Peruvian government, which was essentially a safe conduct out for the hostage takers, for the terrorists.
Unacceptable to Fujimori to do that.
That was acceptable, to have the hostage takers out, but not to release any of the terrorists who are in prison. And I think that it was going just around and around and around in circles. And as Secretary of Defense Cohen said yesterday, it could have gone on for 4 or 5 or 6 months more. And the cost on the health of the hostages themselves, on the government, it's like a big stone in the shoe. And in the particular case of, in my field, foreign policy, we have a very highly respected and widely respected young foreign minister, brilliant intellectual who is needed. We are in the midst of important negotiations with Ecuador, and it just could not go on. So I guess, and I am just guessing, that the president decided that there were no more options. As to the specific timing, I can't say why it took place yesterday. Or
did you, sitting where you do as the Peruvian ambassador to the United States, when he fired the interior minister, and who was the other minister? Who else?
The head of police.
The head of police. When he said, I'm going to replace them, did that signal you at all? Did you say,
well,
I know my president?
It produced a certain antenna movement, but it didn't lead to the conclusion that something was going to happen. I felt that this was the beginning of a political process which was linked to the crisis in the Japanese embassy, but that it not necessarily meant a change of approach. But that may be just my lack of ingenuity.
Knowing the president, are you surprised that at some point he was going to say, I can't tolerate this any longer?
No, I'm not surprised.
It's his nature to gamble.
It's his nature to take serious issues in the agenda, the political and economic agenda of the country, seriously. In the same way that he tackled and overcame the issue of hyperinflation and mismanagement in the economy, in the same way that he tackled and I think succeeded in neutralizing Shining Path and MRTA earlier on. I think this was a situation in which he felt that not just the hostages were being held hostage, but the whole government and the whole political and economic model.
It has a paralyzing effect on everything.
Well, absolutely. It did not paralyze the business of government, the day-to-day business of government, but it was like having half your mind paying attention to this nasty business in the Japanese embassy, where you know that somewhere between 85 and 90% of the population, according to the polls, agree with the way it was being handled during these 3 months of extraordinary patience, I think, and good faith conversations. But at the same time, that could turn a corner at one point, and no government can survive lack of confidence.
Does this give the Army more power
I don't really think so. I've heard speculation to that. In fact, we were discussing with Michael Shifter from the Inter-American Dialogue on that issue. It's like saying that, you know, the Entebbe raid in Israel gave the Israeli army more power. This is a situation which called for an armed intrusion. I think that this was a decision which was taken by the president rather than by the army and suggested to the president, as some people imply or infer.
What does it do for his political career in Peru?
I think it brings it back to balance again. I think he has... this is a president who was a complete unknown in 1990, completely unknown. No one knew. I did not know his name when he was elected. An
economist who had a talk show.
Well, he had a talk show which was not as much circulation as the Charlie Rose show.
Well,
no, he was well known in academic circles,
right.
but he was not a politician. And yet he won against the formidable candidate who was the world-known novelist Vargas Llosa. And the second time around, he won again against the statesman of the stature of Pérez de Cuellar, former UN Secretary General. So he's not there by chance. This is a man who has done his job by, I think, trying to establish the same priorities that the Peruvian people felt ought to be tackled. And I think he did that. He did the adjustment of the political and economic kind I mentioned in the first 5 years was successful. And this second 5-year period, which is essentially aimed at complementing the economic adjustment by micro social policies rather than macro policies, making it more accessible to a greater number of people, fine-tuning the institutions, etc., which were set back not just by the derailment of the previous decades, but also by the self-inflicted coup in 1992, is suddenly interrupted by a kind of, you know, a situation which was similar to the Oklahoma bombing, or in the sense that it was really more of a terrorist and a publicity and media coup than a setback in terms of security. But it certainly revived the whole issue of security, which we had turned the corner around. I remember you talking to the president in '94 about that.
And so where are we now with respect to this particular group of terrorists?
They're gone.
Gone. Their leadership is gone. And the rest of them are in prison.
The principal leader, Victor Polay, is in prison in solitary confinement. The second leader was Serpa, and apparently he died during the rescue operation.
I was traveling, so I didn't see all the video. How was it that all of the terrorists were killed?
I don't know. I understand that there was one encounter with. There are about 14 or 14.
And they normally play soccer at this time of day.
Well, a group of them, about 8 of them, were playing soccer in one of the bigger reception rooms in the embassy, and I think that they were the first to be contacted. I mean,
engaged
violently, and I don't know whether they were then immediately, you know, killed, and what happened to the rest.
No,
I don't know this.
Yeah.
I don't really know that we have any details, and I'm sure we will have details, you know, sometime soon as to just exactly how the fighting took place inside the embassy.
I mean, you don't know whether they went in with orders to kill every one of them.
No, I doubt that very much. I'm sure that the first concern was the safety of the hostages. Right. The second concern was you know, their own safety, yeah. and then the last concern was the safety of the terrorists.
I mean, Fujimori was evidently waiting to go in because he had there with his flak jacket the pictures seen everywhere where he's here in today's New York Times.
Well, he's been under fire before. You know, unfortunately, in 1995, when we had that border war with our neighbor Ecuador, which luckily is now in the process of being solved in conversations, he was there. He was bombarded by mortar for 6 hours, 7 hours. Mm. So it's not a question of, he's hands-on. He's interested in getting the things done. And there had been some criticism, obviously, for obvious reasons, on the security, police and intelligence, right. As to why this could happen.
How could it happen?
That's right. How did 500
That's
people...
a question the Japanese were asking.
Well, we were asking the Japanese, they were asking the Peruvian police. So.
Which raises the other issue, though. Now, yes. I realize that you're here, and this took place yesterday there, and there's been intense, people have not had a chance to do all the talking and finding out all the facts, and they'll all be coming out day by day and more tonight.
Right.
Having said that, do you know, the Japanese said they were not advised ahead of time.
Right.
They obviously not complaining loudly because it was so successful.
Right.
I assume that do we know whether they wanted to know? Did they have some agreement, didn't they, that if they went in, we'll tell you?
I can tell you what I think is clear. There was an agreement in Toronto when the president of Peru met with the prime minister of Japan about 2 months ago, and they produced a communique. Part of that communique, which is obviously in this sometimes convoluted diplomatic language, says that whatever action takes place will be under Peruvian law and the pertinent international agreements, which means basically we're going to take care of the show and apply those resolutions or treaties that condemn terrorism or hostage taking. That's one element. The last element is, the second element that I want to mention in this agreement in Toronto was that the approach would be peaceful until and unless the hostages were either hurt or ill. As I understand it, we have been sending a team of doctors daily, and the hostage takers, the terrorists, suspended that and said that they would not accept medical visits to the hostages but once a week on Saturday. That might have been a linchpin. And in that context, the room for maneuver that the president had, I think, was implicit in the agreement with Japan. Now, I understand that the president did advise, although literally minutes before the action took place, they did try to contact on the phone Prime Minister Hashimoto. He was only able to reach an aide because it was nighttime in Japan. But as you were saying, they have not complained. I presume that had the result been more tragic or more bloody, or
they would have to complain for domestic purposes, well, if nothing else.
But President Fujimori is enormously popular in Japan, you know.
Yeah, I know, because of his Japanese ancestry.
And because he does things well.
That they admire.
Right.
Peruvian-American relations, how are they?
I think they're at the best possible moment, at least since I've been following them. As you mentioned, I've studied here, and I've been in the States for a while. The first year or so that I was in Washington, it was very difficult. It was highly charged ideologically. We were still suffering from the self-inflicted coup, the suspension of the Congress. We had only just re-elected Congress. Since then, we've gone through a whole process of democratic legitimation and creation of new institutions.
Here's my question. Go ahead.
But the question on that, let's say, democracy, human rights issue is no longer part of the bilateral agenda. Not in the sense that you're not interested, the U.S. is not interested in that issue, but it is not a contentious issue. It's an issue which engages both countries as something which is in the process of getting better than it was in the past. The other major issue, which is drugs, it's, I think, an enormous success story, has been for the last 3 years. We have been engaged, particularly since General McCaffrey took over, in what is essentially a successful strategy of breaking down the Air Corps. And that's...
Could I make this argument, and
yeah, sure.
Is this on target, that Latin America in general, since the Alliance for Progress, 37 years ago, the beginning of the Kennedy administration, it doesn't seem to Latin Americans that they have been an object of high priority for American foreign policy. Can you make that argument?
With the exception of NAFTA and the Brady Plan, which was beginning to be done at a certain point. But the general argument is correct. Yes, that's right.
But NAFTA is, once again, focusing on cooperation between the North and the South.
When it was going, now that it's not on fast track, it seems to be petering out. But yeah. Your argument, your contention is correct. Latin America is not the major priority for the U.S. It should be. It seems to me that the U.S. as the only global power has 3 areas of comparative advantage. One is the hemisphere, the other is the Atlantic Union with Europe, and the other is the Asia Pacific. And I think that of the 3, the easiest to cohere, both politically and economic terms, is the hemisphere. Basically because during the past 30 years, before the demise of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, it was very unstable, whereas now It isn't.
But what would you say if they would come, those who advise the president would say, yes, Mr. Ambassador, we understand that and we ought to be better, but look, I mean, Europe is a long-time relationship of a shared sort of tradition, and everybody says that both the opportunity and the challenge comes from Asia. That if we look to where the most competitive nation for the United States, it's in Asia.
Right. But the only way you're going to establish a stable economic and political relationship with Asia is by enhancing a relationship with the Pacific Coast countries of Latin America, in the sense that you triangulate with them. We have.
They understand that word at the White House.
Do they? Yes, well, in any case, I think, I'm not saying, you know, and please don't misunderstand, that the U.S. should abandon the Atlantic Alliance or forget about Asia and just you know, look at South America as a primus inter pares. Basically, what I'm saying is that this is an opportunity which, to a greater or lesser degree, the Latin American option has been shunted to the back because it's looked at it through the Central American prism of the 1980s. And secondly, the danger of a fulcrum swing, a pendulum swing, back to a sort of more populist, state interventionist, leftist type of politics is always there, which is not the case. It's not the case after 1989 in most of the countries in South America. Even the left in South America is essentially market-oriented, essentially democratic, with all the you know the blemishes that these experiments entail.
Yeah. It's great to have you here. I'll read you, this is one piece here from the New York Times yesterday, exactly one after military commandos raided the Japanese diplomatic residence in Lima, Peru today and freed scores of hostages held by Marxist guerrillas. President Alberto Fujimori, clad in a bulletproof vest, came strutting into the compound to congratulate his troops and proclaim victory. In the end, Mr. Fujimori conceded nothing to the guerrillas who had demanded the freedom of hundreds of their jail comrades and reclaimed his reputation as a decisive leader, ready, even eager, to back up his will with force. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
We'll be right back. Donald Marin is here. He is chairman of Paine Webber. We'll talk about Wall Street today and tomorrow. Also, Joan Rivers, a remarkable story about someone who's a survivor and always bounces back. Stay with us.